Have you ever noticed how resting can make you feel uneasy? Not because you have something urgent to do, not because anyone is demanding more from you, but because the moment you finally stop, something inside you begins to whisper that you shouldn't. You sit down after a long day. You close your laptop, you finish the task, you give yourself permission to pause, and instead of relief, you feel tension. A strange discomfort settles in, as if resting is something you have to justify, as if peace itself requires permission. If this feels familiar, you are not alone. Some people carry guilt into moments that were never meant to feel heavy. Even when they have done enough, even when nobody expects more from them, even when their body is asking for rest, the mind continues searching for work, searching for responsibility, searching for proof that they are still earning their place in the world. From the outside, this can look like ambition, productivity, discipline, but underneath it is often something much quieter, a relationship with worth. Because for many people, worth did not begin as something they simply possessed. It became something they learned to earn. Maybe praise arrived when they achieved something. Maybe attention appeared when they were useful. Maybe safety felt more available when they performed well, solved problems, or carried responsibilities beyond their years. Over time, effort became attached to identity. Doing became attached to deserving. And eventually, the nervous system learned a simple equation. If I am productive, I am okay. If I stop, something must be wrong. The strange thing is that this lesson rarely feels like a lesson. It feels like reality. It feels obvious, natural, true. People who feel guilty resting often don't consciously believe they must earn their worth. Instead, they feel it deep inside their body, like an anchor dropped long ago into the ocean floor of their experience. Even after circumstances change, the anchor remains, holding them in place, pulling them back whenever they drift too close to stillness. This is why rest can feel surprisingly unfamiliar, not because rest is dangerous, but because unfamiliar things often feel uncertain. The mind naturally moves toward what it recognizes, even when what it recognizes is exhausting. For someone who has spent years proving themselves through effort, constant motion can begin to feel like home, not a comfortable home, but a familiar one, a room they know how to navigate. They know where everything is. They know the rules. Rest, meanwhile, can feel like entering a completely different room. The furniture is arranged differently. The silence sounds strange. The absence of pressure feels unsettling. And so they return to activity, not because they want to, because familiarity is powerful. Psychologically, the brain is often less interested in happiness than predictability. Predictability feels safe. If someone has spent years living inside productivity, slowing down may create an unexpected sense of vulnerability. Suddenly there is space to notice emotions, space to notice loneliness, space to notice uncertainty, space to hear thoughts that are normally drowned out by endless tasks. Work becomes more than work. It becomes noise, a blanket thrown over feelings that never had a chance to fully speak. The person may not realize this is happening. They simply feel restless. They tell themselves they need to stay busy, need to stay productive, need to keep moving. But underneath that movement is often an attempt to avoid an uncomfortable meeting with themselves. As children, this pattern can begin quietly. A child learns that being helpful earns approval, that being responsible earns recognition, that success creates connection. Nothing about this seems harmful at first. In fact, it often appears positive. The child becomes dependable, mature, accomplished, and others admire them. But admiration can sometimes create a hidden burden. The child begins to feel loved for what they do rather than for who they are. And because children naturally seek belonging, they adapt. They become what the environment rewards. The adaptation works, until one day they grow older and discover they no longer know how to simply exist. Without achievement, without usefulness, without proving something. During adolescence, the pattern often becomes stronger. The world starts measuring performance more aggressively. Grades, talents, milestones, comparisons. The young person learns that there is always another level to reach, another standard to meet, another version of themselves they should become. Rest begins to feel like falling behind, not because it actually is, because the mind starts confusing stillness with stagnation. And once that confusion settles in, every pause can trigger anxiety. As adulthood arrives, the pattern often becomes deeply woven into identity. The person may become highly capable, highly reliable, the one others count on, the one who carries more than their share, the one who always seems to have everything under control. Yet behind the competence is often exhaustion that nobody sees, because they rarely stop long enough to feel it. Or if they do, guilt arrives almost immediately. A voice appears. You should should be doing something. You could be using this time better. You haven't done enough yet. The task may change, but the voice remains. And eventually something interesting happens. The person no longer needs external pressure. They become their own source of pressure. The system begins running on autopilot. No supervisor is necessary. No critic is necessary. The expectation now lives inside them. This is often the moment when people become confused. They look around and realize nobody is demanding as much from them as they are demanding from themselves. Yet the pressure continues because the pressure was never entirely external. It became internalized. A familiar companion, an old survival strategy continuing long after the original conditions have disappeared. And perhaps the deepest realization comes here. The guilt was never created by rest. Rest simply revealed something that was already there. For years, it may have seemed as though stopping was the problem, but stopping only exposed the discomfort that constant motion had been covering. The discomfort was waiting beneath the surface all along. And when viewed this way, everything begins to look different. The guilt is not evidence that you are lazy. It is evidence that your nervous system learned to associate worth with effort. The discomfort is not proof that rest is wrong. It is proof that rest touches a place inside you that has rarely been given attention, a place that learned long ago that love, safety, approval, and value had to be earned. And that place is still trying to protect you, even now, even when protection is no longer needed in the same way. Because the mind often keeps old maps long after the landscape has changed. It continues following roads that once led somewhere important. It continues honoring rules that once made sense. It continues returning to familiar rooms because they feel predictable, even if those rooms have become too small, too crowded, too exhausting. Yet there is something profoundly human about this. The person who feels guilty resting is usually not someone who lacks motivation. They are often someone who has carried responsibility for a very long time. Someone who learned to survive through effort, someone who became fluent in achievement because achievement felt safer than uncertainty, someone who became so accustomed to movement that stillness began to feel foreign. And when you see it this way, the guilt becomes less of a flaw and more of a story written over many years, a story that once served, a purpose, a story that explains why peaceful moments can sometimes feel uncomfortable, why quiet can feel loud, why rest can feel unfamiliar, why slowing down can feel like drifting away from yourself, when in reality, it may simply be the first moment you have spent sitting with yourself in a very long time. And perhaps that is what deserves understanding, not judgment, not criticism, not correction, just understanding. Because every person develops ways of navigating the world. Some learn to protect themselves through distance, some through pleasing others, some through control, and some through endless effort. The guilt surrounding rest is often the shadow cast by that effort, the lingering echo of a life spent trying to earn a place that was never supposed to require earning. And beneath all of it remains something surprisingly simple, a human being, not a machine, not a performance, not a list of accomplishments, just a human being carrying old lessons into the present moment, a human being who learned to feel safe through movement, a human being whose worth existed long before the work began, and long after the work is finished.